What is going on, everybody? Today on Beat Around the Blockchain, we have Brian and Amir. They are working on some pretty cool stuff on the Metaverse side of Web3, as well as the virtual reality side. So I'll go ahead and have them kind of give little intros into who they are, and some heads up into what they're doing, and we'll just kind of dive in.
Yeah, I'll start off first, and then Amir, you can probably give the nice spiel. So I'm Brian. Been working with Amir and Rem5 for coming up on 3 years now. Definitely trying to help out a lot in our arts and community project space, but also been helping since day one. I've been building out immersive web spaces and trying to think of creative partnerships that we can do and have executed on.
Cool. Thanks, Brian. So Amir Brangian, I'm the founder of the Rem5 companies, which we'll talk about in pieces throughout this call, I'm sure. But prior to starting Rem5, I was in investment banking for a better part of a decade, or longer than a decade, actually. Tried immersive tech or high-end VR, modern VR, as one may say. In 2016, became obsessed with it, really couldn't kick the thought of how paradigm shifting these technologies are going to be over the decades to come, and had to get into the space. Our angle, not growing up in the tech scene, was how do we solve a simple problem in this space? And for us, it was accessibility. A lot of these tools are really, really powerful and have been for several years now. They just weren't accessible to those in our community that should have been using them. So that's when we started Rem5. Brian and I are sitting in an 8,000 square foot facility right now, which is still to this day the largest XR innovation center in the world, we believe. Nobody's proven us wrong yet, so we're going to keep saying that. So day one, it was accessibility. How do we empower schools? How do we empower corporations to use these tools for learning and development? And how do we empower our community and local artists and other organizations with this tech? So that was like phase one. And then phase two is where Rem5 Studios came in, and that's where we started producing content. So we do both more agency contract work for clients, and then we also have produced our own in-house IP. So we're kind of this weird vertically integrated immersive tech company.
Yeah, I mean, you guys have your hands in a lot of things, and like you mentioned, Amir, I mean, you said like a list of companies that we'll definitely want to dive into. But I'd love to start both you, Brian, and Amir on, it sounds like VR was really kind of the trigger for you to both dive into the start of everything you guys have built so far. So what was it about your first experiences with virtual reality, whether it was probably either early Oculus or Vive, that caught your attention and made you start to really go down the rabbit hole of what this technology could be?
Yeah, I can even start first there. I think even going back to good old Google Cardboard was kind of a starting point for me. Just because, again, that was actually where accessibility went mainstream. They could ship out millions of cardboards. It's not the best user experience, but like that's such a major step, and we're going to look back on that on this call. So that probably was like 2015, 2016. I had tried out something in there. That combined with Chris Melt's TED Talk, which is incredible if you go back and do that. And that's where he did a live demo with the whole audience using cardboards. And he's talking about the same thing. Amir's talking about how this is going to change everything. It's an empathy machine, and that VR is going to be where it's at. And as technology caught up to that, I even looked back too. Like I went like on a whim to one of our local VR meetups probably 6-7 years ago, because I got like a Facebook ad for it, and that opened me up to a whole new world of, I was there, and he's talking about recording 360 video with 8 GoPros on a stick, right? Like that's how you used to have to do it and then stitch it together manually. So a lot of that was just a big impact for me, because especially in that time, looking into kind of more of the arts angles and kind of interactive and installation and new types of experiences, that's what was super eye-opening for me. And then ironically, met Amir through that type of stuff, and then we worked together on some projects, and then like it's weirdly full circle, but that's kind of where I look back at that start.
Amir, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was, similar, right? I mean, that Chris's TED talk on the empathy machine is something that resonated with me quite a bit. Was that 15 or 16 that TED talk happened? But that was definitely something that got the wheels spinning. That combined with, for me, the first thing I did in VR was play a game, right? So the first
Sure.
6DoF VR, I had done Google Cardboard, some 360 videos, and it got me thinking, right? But didn't hit me the same way that fully interactive VR did, because then my mind I flashed back to another pivotal moment in my life, and that was walking out of the movie theater after seeing Matrix 1, right? Where like brain absolutely shredded at that point, right? And so now I'm like, holy shit, there's a path towards this being real. Are we in a simulation right now, right? So you start to think through that. But for me, on the business side, it was, we can actually democratize experiences in a meaningful way. The tech is good enough, because VR is nothing, VR, AR, spatial computing, metaverse, none of this stuff is a new concept. It's been documented over the last 100 years. People have been talking about it. It's finally the computing power caught up to the aspirations of what it could be. And now, instead of getting sick in VR, you're actually definitively accessing the same neural pathways in your brain than compared to when you're doing something in real life, right? So we crossed over that line in 2016, which to me, you take democratizing experiences plus, for example, experiential learning theory, and you have yourself the most powerful learning and development tool that exists, right? Just profound, hard skills, soft skills, everything. And then you fast forward to what that means to how we work, how we socialize, and ultimately human connection. And it's a complete game changer. You look at what we talk about, like prior paradigm shifts a lot. You look at the internet back in the 90s and how things have progressed. You look at the iPhone and how we all are basically already cyborgs with supercomputers in our pocket, whether we're willing to admit it or not. It's pretty easy to see a path of, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when we're going to completely change the way that we interact with computers.
So you mentioned it as a learning and development tool. So is that the first application that really resonated with you, that kind of got you excited and went down this journey?
Yeah, totally. Right. I mean, you think, and this is also coming from somebody too, and maybe Brian, you're similar, but like, I was never very engaged in school, right? I was not a very like textbook type person. I'm like, I need to go and do things. And so at its simplest level, VR is the magic school bus, right? For kids. So you think about a fourth grader, an eighth grader, a 12th grader, right? You can actually now go and democratize these experiences and you can scale them. And now even today with how magical technology is, it's still, and we would never imply that it's as good as doing the real thing, but it allows you to scale and provide equitable access to these things. So something as simple as touring the White House or touring Anne Frank's house, right? That a certain subset of kids get to go do, but now you can bring that number from 1% to 95% or 100% with this technology. And then you can also do things that you couldn't do otherwise. You can ride along on the Apollo 11 mission, which is, again, crazy. It's bonkers, right? I mean, that's magic school bus stuff that we can do today. So and then you look at the corporate world and you think about hard skills and soft skills. Hard skills, no brainer, right? It's why does a flight simulator make sense to a pilot? Well, we can now scale that and do it for all hard skills, especially as we continue to enter a period in at least the U.S. economy where there's a huge gap between what companies need for skills and who's available to be hired. I mean, our unemployment rate is at historic lows and people don't have the skills that companies need. So for upskilling, right, it's been a long time coming, but VR is just, that's where I got really excited out of the gates. And then there's also the soft skills side of things too, right? The whole dystopian picture, if you think about where we're going with AI and industrial automation, a lot of those hard skills continue to be replaced by robotics and AI. So what are we left as humans to contribute? Well, it's our soft skills. It's leadership, communication, cultural competence, emotional intelligence. And so VR is another tool where you can simulate those experiences in a safe environment, which again is like, gets me really excited.
Yeah. So on the note of, we talked about like upskilling, development, learning, and education around VR. But you mentioned the VR or the community and communication and like that sense of belonging that you start to build, and we're seeing a lot within like Discords currently, but there's a lot of transferable ways to make that even better within VR, right? So how do you see that kind of progressing over, one, how it has so far, and obviously Oculus being a very big part of that in Meta rebranding, kind of putting all their eggs into that basket. Like, what do you see that trending like in the coming years, both short term and even long term, in terms of how we balance both current reality as well as virtual reality?
What do you think, Brian?
Yeah, I mean, I've got kind of an interesting experience from even just a couple of years ago. So we were big fans of the Wave platform that ran out of our HTC Vive Pros through a gaming computer, like the full high-end VR rig that prior to Quest 1, not a lot of people had the space and money to do that. So we would go into, and Wave is like basically a virtual concert platform. People could come in, there'd be a live DJ, there'd be visuals, like it was awesome. It was really cool. So I worked with a couple of DJs to do events in there, and they had a very small but very tight-knit community, right? Like people would show up. It's a Thursday night, and this is just what they do. And this is their social group. And they're hanging out, and like they're listening to music a little bit, but it's mostly about being there in the shared space together. And then there's a lot of fun mechanics of that experience where you could spawn items and like play with things. And right, it was awesome. Wave, like a few other groups, have also completely gone away from VR just because adoption of the high-end equipment was a lot slower than anybody wanted. And they haven't really built out for Quest yet. But I think seeing and I think that's true with like VR chat especially as well. You just get these really tight-knit communities where people that is their social time and that is their friend groups. And Amir talks about all the time that those virtual experiences are real experiences. And I think that embodied avatars and being in space with each other is a massive part of that versus the conversation we're having here. Clearly, we can reflect back and be like, oh yeah, we were on the podcast with Gabriel. Like that was awesome. We were on a 2D situation, and I know you hopped in, and we'll get to Simulacra eventually, but I think meeting in embodied and shared space takes that to another level, I think, in community building for sure.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. We'll obviously talk about Simulacra and some of the things you guys are doing there, but just having played around in a couple of the different metaverse spaces with different organizations kind of experimenting with it, there's definitely, there's still a lot to go, especially as we transition that more into a fully immersive virtual reality experience. Even doing like the avatars over a laptop or computer feels different than Zoom. When you see something moving in a way that the human behind the screen wanted them to move and interact with you and your avatar, it feels a little bit closer. And I feel like that helps from a community building standpoint, from a relationship development standpoint. And that could be translated into a lot, especially in business. So I see a lot of the appeal there. But I think it would be a kind of a good transition into, what was one of the first things that you guys had started over the course of all of your different businesses that you have? Brian, have you guys always both been a part of them? Or when did you kind of come into the picture with it? Would love to hear a little bit of an overview of where it all started.
Yeah, I mean, I'm coming up on just about 3 years officially, with Amir and the REM 5 team. We've known each other longer than that. And yeah, I mean, I think there's been a big pivot, right? And we can talk a lot about how we really doubled down on immersive web building pre-pandemic, and then the pandemic hit, and we're like, yep, this is something that we really want to focus on. So that's been where we've been working hand in hand, pre-2020 to really develop this concept of immersive web experiences, mostly because like we found that was another profound experience where we're like, wow, this can solve any business problem and any type of like real event you want to try to do and get people together. Like there's just, we have a great example to just do all of that. And so we're just like, all right, sweet. And then it's kind of turned into something that was like, all right, pandemic or not, this is the technology of the future. And it gets us really excited, and there's got to be something behind that. So.
No, that's awesome. Amir, you want to kind of dive into like the history of REM 5, really where it started, whether it was REM 5 VR locally in Minnesota, I think it was, all the way up to what you guys are doing with Simulacra.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I kind of touched on it earlier. So after drinking all of the Kool-Aid of the future of immersive technology in 2016, I just quit my job straight up and started building out or really taking a deep dive into understanding what the industry looked like at that time in 2017 is where I spent a lot of time just doing diligence, right? Trying to understand what problem can we solve here in Minneapolis without having a bunch of money and a super technical tech background. So
you quit your job and then started doing the research.
That's where I went deep, right? Like
Okay.
I took the which pill? I took the red pill before I quit my job. And then, the effects kicked in once I was unemployed. But yeah, so it kind of staggered that, right? Because like if
Sure.
I mean, we all know how it is. I mean, the world's a little bit different now, where people mostly their work-life balance has changed a lot since early 2020. But think back prior to then, it was really hard for anybody who worked a job. I mean, I was working 80 hours a week as an investment banker, so I wasn't actually going to spend a lot of time thinking critically and committing to solving another problem when you already have a full-time job. So I'm like, if I'm going to do this, you gotta send it full. So it was, how do we get back, solve the accessibility problem? That's where we took out a lease for an 8,000 square foot warehouse, bought a bunch of hardware and understood and did a bunch of research on the software, started to package that as a white glove type service. And then ultimately, doing a lot of missionary work, right? Even today, right? A lot of what you're doing in the Web3 space is education. And all of our industries do a really poor job of communicating the value proposition to the potential users of this technology. And so day by day, one by one, you have to fix that, right? You have to meet with superintendents of schools. You have to meet with HR groups at companies. You have to show them the technology. Seeing is believing with this stuff. And we put ourselves in a position by having a physical location to actually be able to show them, right? I mean, we just hosted a company last week. We hosted a marketing division of a company, 60 people for 8 hours to get them up to speed on all things Metaverse, VR, AR, Web3. We couldn't do that. We couldn't do it in a scalable way if we didn't have a dedicated facility. So that's where it all started. From there, a lot of the work that we were doing was with schools and with companies. And so that's where the REM 5 for Good entity started, because it was our facility and, drinking beer and stuff on the weekends, because we also are open to the public on Saturdays and Sundays. It's a whole nother piece of our business, but it's also back to that seeing is believing. Turns out if you give a non-gamer a beer and some good pizza, they're willing to try something new. And so that's what we do on the weekends. So we needed to kind of bifurcate the two businesses from that respect. So that's where the REM 5 for Good came from. And then the original thesis from day one was, once we get people in this technology, exposed to it firsthand, and we actually show the value of it to solve business problems and real world problems, then we'll have an opportunity to start creating content on our own in areas we know that people already want it. Like, we don't have to make things and then just put them out there. Before we make things, we already know that the end market wants it and it doesn't exist yet, right? So it's akin to a super cheesy kind of good analogy is it's like an internet cafe in the 90s, and we started building websites in the background that we saw people looking for, but they didn't exist yet.
Right.
So that's where Rim 5 Studios came from. The other component of that, and this is a good segue into Simulacra, is that everything we did, so in our physical location, we just crossed the 40,000 guest mark. So we've had 40,000 people through our space. Most of those people are first-time users of anything XR related. And so for better or for worse, we are totally jaded when it comes to designing for the end user, because we make things over easy to use, because we've seen how wrong it can go if things are too complicated. And and we've learned by being in the streets, right? Like, this is what we do, and we do it at scale. So that's where Simulacra came from, one of our products and platforms, where pandemic hit and we needed to be able to still fulfill our mission in a way where we couldn't go and put 1,000 people in a headset a day. And so right around that time, Chrome and Firefox browsers were getting better, so we could actually create a networked spatial environment within them. And so we started, I think our first event was really early in the pandemic. We hosted an art show, right? And it was a ton of fun. And so what you two were both talking about a few moments ago, that feeling of presence, even though we were these avatars that didn't have facial expressions yet, you still felt better. It felt more natural than a Zoom call. Everyone ended up gathering around in little circles, having conversations just like they would in the real life. And so that was a light bulb moment for Brian and I. And but what we saw is a lot of these platforms out there were built for one audience, or maybe two, right? But you can bucket them primarily into two audiences. One is kids or gamers. So you have your Roblox, Fortnite,
Sure,
and kind of that world, right? Minecraft. And then you started to see a lot of these Web3 first platforms popping up, right? Decentraland, Sandbox, CryptoVoxels. But our customers were corporate clients primarily in their 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s, and they couldn't use a Minecraft or a Roblox. They also couldn't use a Decentraland or a CryptoVoxels. So we're like, whoa, if we want to keep serving our market that we've been serving for 2 years, we need to build our own metaverse platform that is super simple to use. And that's where Simulacra came from. So we built something that's at its simplest level, it's really, really easy to use. And we find that our stakeholders, it works for them. So we're working with brands that are trying to reach a consumer base that is not a core gamer base. And then we're also working with companies or institutions that are looking to do educational experiences where a website or Zoom and a PowerPoint doesn't cut it anymore. So how do we provide an incrementally engaging experience, use the quote unquote metaverse to do it, but not have to deal with all of the friction that a lot of those other platforms provide. So, and the ironic thing is that those worlds are starting to collide too, because a lot of the brands that we're talking to now that want to work with a non-gamer audience, the reason their brands are so powerful is because they have really compelling stories to tell. And so now it's almost like we're doing brand experiences, but we're also educating, right? When you go into any, go into Adidas flagship store or Nike's flagship store, half of the square footage now is dedicated to storytelling, right? It's not retail space, right? So it's like almost in a fun, exciting way, like these worlds are kind of starting to collide. So I'll stop and shut up there.
No, that's awesome. So you'd put air quotes around metaverse, and this got me thinking, because a lot of the conversations I have with people who are newer to the NFT and Web3 space, they hear this term metaverse thrown around in a similar way where you just hear NFT thrown around, but it's like it can be broken down into a spider web of things. So when somebody's like, what the heck is the metaverse? And maybe they have experience of like understanding, is that Decentraland or is that like Minecraft? Like, how do you simply explain metaverse? And also, what are your thoughts on like that being the blanket term, and if that's going to be like gone away, hopefully in the near future? Brian, you want to take it?
Yeah, go for it, Brian.
Uh-oh. That's usually Amir's time to do his metaverse description. I mean, I think we all kind of agree that the term has been thrown around so much, just like the early days of the pandemic.
Yeah.
Virtual now became literally anything. Like a website is a immersive virtual experience, right? So we ran into that a lot, and now the next stage of this educational journey for us is, I'm sitting there getting a haircut, and they're like, I tell them I work in VR and immersive tech, and they're like, oh yeah, Metaverse, the Facebook thing, and I'm like,
right.
I'm like, we don't have enough time here to really dig into it, but it's very interesting to find out how, our user base, middle of the curve here, is thinking about these spaces and what information they're pulling from headlines, NPR, social media, right? Like what do they think it is, and then how can we better position what we're up to in the space? I mean, we struggled with that because before Meta changed their name, we were definitely more focused on using a lot of terminology in a Simulacra environment as WebXR and immersive web, just because, again, our users got that. If we had to open up the term metaverse, and metaverse was even a scary term, right? A year and a half ago. So we always have to kind of step lightly because it comes down to simplicity. If the messaging and the naming is confusing, that's not going to be helpful to our users. So we have come to terms with metaverse now getting a little bit over the hump that it can be helpful in these conversations, and it's buzzwordy enough that a company comes in and goes, yeah, we're going to do metaverse thing, and we're like, okay, cool. Now we can level set that they want to do something a little bit more forward thinking, which is great. And then we can start to chip away at like, what do they actually mean? Because that could mean VR. That could be a solo VR experience. And now that means metaverse. And so the trouble is there's no great definition. We have to find out how we're communicating our experiences and like Amir said, the value prop of what we're trying to build and what the other side of the coin is talking about, what they really mean, so that we can help kind of diffuse, like, all right, like what are we actually talking about here? And again, the education is the full part of that, so that we can help them make more informed decisions and be more informed about technologies moving forward, which is a huge takeaway for anybody that works, again, in any business. Every single business will be touched, by how quickly technology is moving, if they haven't already.
Yeah, Gabriel, one good data point for you is, so when we launched, at the time was our most exciting project we had ever done, was we did a metaverse experience for the Minnesota Twins and hosted the world's first press conference in professional sports with a bunch of Hall of Famers. Mind-blowing. It was so cool to be part of. And if I go back to the press release and drafting that with the Minnesota Twins, we went back and forth 100 times on if we wanted to use the word metaverse or not. So this was January. Well, we would have been writing the press release in December of 2020. And we ultimately decided to call it the immersive web strategically, because as soon as you use the word metaverse or VR or any of those terms, one, people get scared and intimidated, and two, they assume that you need a VR headset. They just assume. Even if you say in big, bold caps letters, it's the headline of the article, no VR headset required, people still see those words and go, oh, I can't do it. I don't have one of those gamey things, goggles, whatever. That just happens. So, but when Facebook dropped the gauntlet, Meta, it helped from some perspective of people being like more comfortable with that word. And since then, it took us a couple months to be like, all right, fine. Like if you can't beat them, join them. And now we just use the word metaverse, right? While I think that Meta has confused a lot of people and contributed to the confusion, I do think it has helped us in the respect of like it's made it more okay to talk about these things and given us it's cracked the door open for us to move in, which is good. But and then to answer one of the other questions too is I hope that there's a full rebrand of the entire emerging tech space over the next 5 years. Because right now we have AR, we have VR, we have Metaverse, and we have Web3. And all of those words, to somebody who's not in our space, get bound together as the same freaking thing. They are wildly different things. They play different roles and they have different use cases. And so we just got to figure out, and that's where a lot of the confusion comes from, I think. And so, so we'll see. I mean, Apple's going to come into the space at some point in time, and they are potentially going to be the one who could have a big enough hammer to push a rebrand, which could be good for all of us. Because right now the word metaverse needs to be kind of forgotten for a while. It's doing. I think at this point in time, it's probably hurting more than it helps all of us.
Yeah, I mean, my thoughts on it is there really wasn't there. To your point, there weren't any big enough players making a big enough like impact in terms of innovation and building in that realm of the space over this last bull cycle, where all the attention and media was on it. There was a small handful of things that were happening around Metaverse. It was incredibly confusing. Nobody really understood what it meant. There was some bad branding around it. And so everyone just like hears that and wants to run away. And that's why I was interested to hear your guys' thoughts on Metaverse. But I think to Brian's point earlier, similar to what I think it was Brian, what happened with Zoom, where that was, like kind of rebranded over the last 2 years because the big pandemic happened and it was like, oh, virtual calls. And now it's just, oh, I'm hopping on a call, right? Or I'm going to a meeting is the normal words that we use, where 2 years ago that was, oh, I'm getting in my car and driving to a client versus, oh, I'm hopping on a Zoom call. It's almost assumed that that's probably what you're going to do. And so I think there's going to be a rebranding with Metaverse and what all of that means. Hopefully over this next big boom of people trying to figure out what's going on with all of the building that's happening over the next year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years.
I think Zoom is such a good example where, Zoom became the Kleenex of like what we're doing right now is definitely not a Zoom call, but like for the nomenclature of everybody out there, that's what we would call this. Yep. And how it happened overnight. Like I remember working at a company late 2018, early 2019, like we were still conference call era. You dial in, we're all sitting around the table and like you're on a phone call. And then overnight, computers and internal tech stacks that probably were more than capable of doing Zoom calls. Like, this needs to be a thing. And I remember like Skype early on and now the
WebEx.
Microsoft Teams or whatever that's all turning into WebEx. WebEx was actually really tough because when we say WebXR, when we were using that term for a little bit, that they were like, oh, you said WebEx, like a video conference thing. Like, oh crap. Like that's something that a ton of corporate America uses. So I think that just the Zoom example where it went from 0 to a million, in a span of a couple months, that's the type of ride that we're in for over the next couple of years. I mean, we're on this acceleration curve that may be nearly a straight line soon, that all of this stuff is going to change so quick. And so if we can stay ahead of that and try to see beyond and continue to find out what companies, individuals, and brands need, that's where we're going to win, because it's going to be overnight. Everybody's now doing the next thing. And I don't know when that's going to be, but that's why we're trying to position ourselves really well to capture that.
Yeah, absolutely. You want to be ready for that ride and be a part of why it happens, right? Be somebody who can be looked up to as, hey, you've been doing this for half a decade to almost a decade, maybe at that point. And you've been like, to Amir's point, it's like your data is from people and clients and all the different businesses that you have, and you're getting feedback from people on the ground, both in Minneapolis and beyond. Right. So it's good data from years of research and hard work and innovation and trying new things and asking questions and lots of tears, I'm sure, in the process. And so you can be also that educator to the greater space as it continues to develop and people want to go in and try these new things. But when it comes to businesses, like what you'd said, trying to figure out what businesses need within the space, like what have you found so far? Like what intrigues businesses when they come in and want to take the space seriously? Because I imagine there's probably a lot of people that they want to know what it is or try it out because it seems like the cool thing or the right thing to do. Especially over the last year, I'm sure you had people reach out to you because they're like, oh, I don't want to miss this marketing curve almost, right? And so, like, what are you finding? What are the conversations like that you're having with organizations mostly?
Yeah, I mean, it's while we are planning for the future and trying to position ourselves, our business model was always built around how do we provide value today, for better or for worse, right? It's different than some of the other players in the space, where they can build, but not really have any traction or revenue or use cases. We don't have the luxury to be able to do that. So we're forced to find value today for people. And so I come back to the two lanes that we've found the most success. Well, we've done a lot of really cool, fun, experimental. We've done comedy shows. We've done healing. We've done all sorts of stuff in the metaverse and had a lot of fun with it. But the two best use cases, business cases that we found are, one is brands looking to create experiences for a non-gamer core audience. We find that kills, right? Like it's just we're just moving from it would be silly if you were a brand today and you didn't have a website, right? It's going to be silly in the future if you don't have a interactive spatial 3D website in the future, right? And so that's who we're serving in one market. Like Minnesota Twins are a great example of that, right? I mean, while they do have a very young audience, they also have a lot of folks who are older. And if you build an experience in Roblox, a big portion of their fan base is going to feel alienated from it, right? So that's why we slot it in there perfectly. And then the other piece is learning and development. So when you're looking to deliver content or create educational experiences, we just find that a lot of the existing platforms don't suit themselves very well to be able to do that for a corporate America. So one of our most successful experiences that we've built in the Metaverse, I'll keep using quotations, is called One City, Two Realities. And so in Minnesota here in particular, we have this Minnesota Nice saying, and we like to pat ourselves on the back for great place to live and parks and trails and all this stuff. But when you start to look at the data, we have some of the worst racial inequities in the country across the board, from incarceration rates to education gap to redlining to wealth gap. So we built a space that really takes all that data, images, video, audio clips, and kind of brings that whole story to life. And that's been a great training space for big corporations like Target and General Mills. So we're basically replacing PowerPoints and Zoom calls and using this metaverse tool to deliver that content in an engaging, compelling way. And we think that that's the tip of the iceberg in terms of what we've been able to do to date in that market. And we're really excited there. So those are the two areas we've been spending our time, and we'll probably continue to spend most of our time in those two verticals, because that's where we think a lot of the market's ignoring those verticals.
Yeah, I would agree. And so it sounds like some of the main use cases are around like creating an environment for either, I mean, you mentioned basically a conference room type of environment for presentations, but having them feel a little bit more immersed instead of just a Zoom call and a PowerPoint. Let
me just stop you there, just so we're crystal clear on it. We don't like conference rooms in the metaverse. Okay. None of this is that. This is like, think of going to your favorite museum, and you physically are walking around, you're seeing visually things, you're hearing things, you're interacting with things. That's what we're talking about. We don't do any conference roomy type things. We don't think that makes sense today with where the technology is.
Sure. You also compared it to websites though. So like when you say something like that, like websites are just natural to what everything on the internet's on, seems like a big statement for what you guys are building. Would love some elaboration on that piece.
Yeah, I mean, websites are delivering information, right? So if you go from think of like back to my like Adidas or Nike example, right? Adidas has they're doing a lot of work around recycling plastic and integrating that into their goods, right? So the simplest way, but least effective way, is to deliver that content on a 2D website, videos, text, whatever, right? But it's compelling, and for those that really want to dive deep into it, they can. The other side of the spectrum is a physical retail store. That now I go to the physical store, I can see the 10 steps that plastic goes through with my very own eyes, right? It's more of a museum now, right? And it's really engaging. My retention goes up, my engagement goes up, and the emotion of that story really starts to hit home. But the tough part with doing it in a physical world like that is that it's really tough to scale that, right? You have to, only so many people can make it to that physical store and experience it a day. And so what we believe is we can get the best of both worlds. We can now use the web to deliver a more compelling storytelling experience, but we can do it at scale. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's kind of taking the physical, I mean, in a sense, taking the physical benefits of being there, but being able to deliver it to everybody who is not at that location and have that same impact.
And that's where that statement, and we don't mind how bold it is, that this is the future of the internet, is nice. Where as we're building a web-based experience, like when you hopped in Simulacra the other day, it is just a URL, one click. We guide you through some onboarding, and you're in. So you can imagine, as that simplicity gets even better. I mean, we're trying to keep it very simple to get in and to use. That becomes now the default, and even better and easier than hopping on a call like this. Or Grandma knows how to use Zoom now. Grandma knows what a link is. We use Grandma a lot because we want Grandma to be able to join in on these experiences. So Grandma can click a link and then be in and using our platform with no downloads, which is like a really big piece of it. Like you are just in a web page at the end of the day versus, well, you're in an app that's on your computer that you have a login, or you have a wallet connect, and there's all these other steps to it. I mean, that's where we really get excited, is that yes, you could imagine going to Adidas, Nike.com, and you don't even land 2D. You'll go directly into 3D in the very near future. And that'll be an owned environment, and whether they link that to other platforms or other spaces, that's going to be the story to tell in the coming years. But from a branded, owned, they got their arms around it, and this is their website, and it could be super exciting. I mean, that's going to be wild because nobody's doing that as like a default. We're doing it as kind of a specialty thing that can add to a branded experience, but very soon that'll be the norm for the right case. There'll still be points in time where it's like I'm going to publish my dissertation. That's a 100-page PDF that maybe does not need to be special web, and that's fine.
But we're talking to a big university about using the metaverse for students to showcase their final projects for a class, right? So
I take that back.
Yeah, I mean, as long as you know going ahead of time that you have the power of this tool, your output and the way that you present your information would just be different, right? So, no more 100-page papers in the future. Right?
Yes, I take that back because basically students will know that their final presentation is going to be imagery on a wall, maybe some video content, maybe some 3D objects, and them being able to be in there and actually talk to you about it. That's why we just the content placed in these spaces is important, and you can't just pigeonhole or shoehorn in everything. But I mean, maybe talking about the falls space would be another really good example, Amir, of taking drier content and actually positioning that spatially for education and retention.
Yeah, real quick, just another example, Gabriel, there. So the city of Minneapolis, or the state of Minnesota, is taking back the river that runs through Minneapolis. They're taking back that land, that area, from federal ownership, bringing it back to state ownership so that they can begin to revitalize and tell more of the story of the Dakota indigenous history of that land that's been, for all intents and purposes, erased, right? So how do we come back and tell that story? And they had put together a bunch of materials for an in-person meeting that helped kind of tell the history, the story, and then the vision for where they want to bring it over the next 10, 20, 30 years. And we got connected with them. And ultimately what we ended up doing is we ended up replacing their in-person meetings and building a metaverse environment that took all of that data, the content, the stories, the imagery, and we built a virtual museum or exhibition out of it. And then not only that, for 2 months, this was back in January and February, every week there was a block of time where one of the indigenous Dakota leaders was in there live to give tours of the space.
Oh, that's cool.
Right? Which is like so cool. And we're not talking kids or gamers here, right?
Yeah.
I mean, this is the average attendee was probably 50 years old, right? And now they're got their little avatar, getting a live tour through the space, bringing it to life and telling that story. So that data all very well could have gone on a web page, 2D web page that you could have just scrolled through. But the level of engagement, the level of information retention, the level of emotion felt uncomparable in this format versus a 2D web page. And again, those are things that we think is just scratching the surface, but is not your typical headline news for the metaverse today.
Well, yeah, because you guys are you're doing what, I mean, essentially everybody's talking about everyone needs to do, and you're making it simple. You're making it accessible. You're making it so grandma can use it. And it's not going to be until we get to that point across the board where this Web3 space becomes scalable. It's just not. I mean, you think about, I have a lot of conversations early on about minting an NFT. What does that process look like, right? You need a wallet in a KYC, and then you need to go also get a MetaMask wallet. You need to know how the process all of those funds, move them over to the right wallet. Then you got to go to a web page and mint and hope that there's no issues. You have to pay gas fees, and then you have to send that if it's valuable to a ledger. So now you've got to have that other separate wallet and make sure you don't screw anything up there. And then you got all these scams. It's a mess, right? And that it needs to be as simple as liking a picture on Instagram. Like that needs to be how simple it is. And everybody knows how to go to Nike.com. Right? You're talking about the difference of going to Nike.com versus Nike.eth, and it happens to be a 3D web page that you now feel like immersed in, right? And then that gives an opportunity for the brand to then tell a more emotional story that really connects with the end user or buyer, and ultimately that impacts purchase decisions, that impacts how I feel about the brand in general. So brand awareness and sentiment is impacted. And that's something that's scalable. It's super easy to do. It's no different than going to their website outside of knowing, okay, how do I move my avatar around? And what color do I want my shirt to be? Right? But it's cool because it feels like a customized experience too. Or a lot of web page, I used to work for HubSpot, and our CMS was really cool because you can try to figure out who's on the other end on your website based off of like cooking their browser and things like that. And you're able to identify, okay, this person might work for this industry. And so I'm going to have case studies that pop up on the web page for them in their industry, or somebody in a different industry, they'll get different case studies that pop up. Right. And that's really neat. But you're talking about making it even more hyper personalized to every individual. They're the ones making it personalized to themselves, and it's only impacting in hopefully a positive way how they're interacting with that brand.
Yeah, 1,000%. And you bring up a really good point too. And this is a whole nother podcast for another day. But with that power comes a ton of responsibility as well. Right. So data privacy and ethics. I mean, all of these issues are not only are they not going away, they're going to become exaggerated and of more importance as we move into this next generation. So, and then the other thing you hit on too, I mean, I mean, until all of this stuff, one of our other, we have a lot of cliche sayings. The other one is like, none of this stuff goes mainstream until people aren't talking about the technology anymore, right? They're talking about the experience. And like when I go to buy an NFT, I'm not even talking about all of that, or maybe I don't even know my shit's on the blockchain, right? It just like works. That's just the back end tech that's going. I don't know how the internet works, right? I mean, I'm just using the internet, right? I don't need to. So I think we're a ways away from that. But, you know, back to the where we started a half hour ago on it just becoming the, like when a 10-year-old says, hey, I met up with so-and-so last week. You probably don't realize it, but they're probably talking about meeting up in Minecraft or Roblox.
Yep.
Not in person, right? Or I mean, certainly today, but even 5 years ago, I remember catching myself where I'd be like, oh, I talked to so-and-so, and then I'd be like, oh shit, I actually just text with them. I never actually talked to them, right? This is just that next, we just keep moving the bar.
No, that's exactly it. I mean, that goes back to saying like, oh, I got on a meeting with so-and-so, right? Or I had a meeting with them. You don't assume it's in person anymore, right? Unless they give more context on top of that. In the same way of like, oh yeah, I like invested in this company, but you don't realize you actually just bought an NFT, right? I went and bought a house, but it was as simple as like clicking a button and it's on the blockchain. You don't even realize that, but you get all the benefits of it being on the blockchain. And I do agree. I think we're a ways away from that. And there's a lot of foundation that still needs to be built in the process. And there's a lot of really cool companies doing stuff around that. But I definitely think we have a lot to build to get to that point. But it's going to take that in order for this to be truly scalable, or at least a lot closer to that than we are now.
We'll get there.
Well, that's what you guys are doing, right? And I mean, you guys are doing a kick butt job. I got a chance to be in Simulacra 2 days ago during one of your meetups, and it was such a cool experience. Just diving in, and it was so simple, right? Like it wasn't this wildly like over the top deal, but it was just really cool having conversations with people. The spatial audio, or whatever the terminology is for it, or like I'm near you and I'm talking to you, but as somebody is like having a conversation starts walking away, I can't hear them, so we can have those private conversations. Just small little things that you guys are doing within there at the early stages. It made such a difference in how I felt about it, and I didn't even realize I was doing anything that complex. It felt as simple as like hopping in a Zoom call, but it felt so much more impactful. Right. And I felt like I had a lot more fun during the process, and felt a lot more engaged with the people that I was talking to within that.
Yeah. I mean, the fun part you just mentioned is really important for us as we, you know, depending on the experience people are going into, and especially a lot when we talk about augmented reality, is that like people want to have a fun experience. You don't have to keep it, you know, we take a lot of learnings from both what we've done creating for virtual and a lot of just events and spatial design in the real world, right? Like we also get that, yeah, you don't want to recreate sometimes a 1-for-1, like a virtual twin. Like we don't have physics. We can put, like the gallery you were in was out in space because like, why not, right? And then people get out there and they're like, oh, sweet. Like, of course I should have realized that we're just on a spaceship gallery or whatever the backstory is. So I think being playful and having some fun with it, and like Amir's considerations when he was kind of designing out the avatar that you're in, like it's kind of a why not, right? And it gives you a lot of opportunity to connect across a broad range of audiences, because grandma might be like, oh, that's the cutest little thing I've ever seen. And a 10-year-old might be like, got it. Like, this is my character. I can jump. I can, you know, they're going to be the one climbing trees and stuff in the space. And so keeping it fun is super important. And when we, like with the twin space and a few of these other client projects, it's like, you can have some whimsy to it. You can play with physics a little bit because that's what people want. I mean, there's a level of escapism to it where it's like, gotcha. Like I'm in the Metaverse. You know, that's what we're able to do there. And I think that's a very important consideration on our end for a lot of projects.
One other thing I want to add there, though, too, is that we're not saying that the other projects or experiences that are super whimsical are wrong, right? We're just back to where our DNA was formed in this space, is working with a different audience, which is a non-gamer audience. And so we have to create those bridges, and we have to like bring them along with us. And so we still have to abide by some basic physics rules, because the average 50-year-old won't know what to do if you put them in a space that is too whimsical, right? Or if we put a lot of weight on the avatar builder, before they try it, your non-gamer won't believe you that they're going to actually care about their appearance in here until you actually get them in there. So that's another, like, one of our favorite things to do too, is you get people that are talking trash of like, oh, I don't care about my avatar. But no matter how old the people are, the first thing they talk about when they get into the lobby is, oh, cool, I like your outfit, or what took you so long to get in? They're like, oh, I couldn't decide between this and that. It's like, gotcha. Like, you, without knowing it, unconsciously just proved a point that everybody still has the concept of self-expression in these virtual environments, which I think is a huge like light bulb for non-gamers, because the gamers already get it, right? We don't need to sell them on it, but our portion of the market's just different, and we're bringing them along with it. But the worlds are going to collide and merge at some point here.
Yeah, I actually think the gamers give more pushback to the whole metaverse concepts, probably partially because of the terrible branding it's really had over the last year or 2 years, and it's not really in alignment with what they want. But to your point, I mean, it's something that in the metaverse everybody can connect with, because at the end of the day, like, people want to express themselves. They want to like have their personality show through, and they want other people to feel that as well. And that's the perfect platform to be able to do it on. It's just, okay, how can we execute this in a really simple way that still doesn't take away from any of that experience that you guys are creating? And you're doing an awesome job. So, would love to just kind of wrap up. Based off of, you guys are working with a lot of companies. I'm sure you're having a lot of conversations with people within the space. What are some shout outs of people that are doing some really cool things that we should definitely look into?
Yeah, I mean, we did some, we're clearly always trying to like follow, all the newsletters and check out as much as we can. A lot of times there can be a lot of stuff. But I think something that we were checking out during some research for the client last week was an experience from Timberland Boots. That's kind of a soloed, web-based, immersive experience where they're using a lot of the same pieces of the puzzle that we're interested in, which is storytelling and a nice way of presenting content. There's a ton of stuff that they did that we would not do. And then there's a lot of stuff that they did that were like, that's super interesting. So as far as like seeing kind of who's out there, the interesting part though is like, right, it's like in there, it's like kind of a microsite that they made, and we're not sure, it's not really part of like a platform like we're trying to approach, but from another brand that is exploring how do we use the web in 3 dimensions. That was a pretty interesting example for us to check out pretty recently here.
Yeah, that was pretty cool. Brian might roll his eyes at this one, but another one like story I like to tell is around a VR native app called Golf Plus. It's golf in VR, right?
Sure.
VR only. But it was one of the first times that I found myself pulled to the headset all the time, right? Like, it gave me a reason to, I got to charge my headset. I got to make sure, I got to clear my schedule because I got to get my rounds in, right? Because it's really well done. They listen to their community in terms of features and making it really easy, which so many apps just don't do this right, including Meta themselves. Their UI is a complete fucking nightmare. I don't know if do you have a VR headset, Gabriel?
Yeah, I haven't. I've had a Quest 2 for a year and a half now.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what your opinion is, but the like home menu and being able to navigate just gets more complicated every day. And I'm like, what are we doing here? Like it's not
Yeah.
even like it's like accelerating in the wrong direction, and I'm so baffled by it. But what Golf Plus does is they make it really easy for the three of us to go play a round of golf together. And golf is one of those great examples of, back to the comment you made earlier about a boardroom. I would much rather the three of us go and hang out in the driving range at Golf Plus and just chit chat, catch up, talk business, do whatever, than go sit in a boardroom in a VR headset. I'd rather do a Zoom call or video call than a boardroom, but let's go do something. Let's engage, right? Like let's create meaningful experiences together and build relationships and do business together, right? I mean, that's the future of how I think we're going to do a lot of our meetings, right? Because I don't want to sit in a boardroom, right? I don't need to sit in a boardroom. It sounds cool. It's a good talking point for headlines, but that's why we no different than why we would walk the golf course in real life. Let's do it in VR. That's where we do business too, right? So they've done a really, really exceptional job, both building a good platform, but building a strong community there, which was a ton of fun. And then, I think that's my example. And also you could argue that they have created a metaverse, right? How is that any different than any of the other definitions we're talking about, right? It just happens to be golf and community and a group that's bonding golfers and non-golfers, play in that space. So I think that they're a shining star in the space.
Yeah, I mean,
at the height of our obsession, we were playing in international Twitch stream tournaments with broadcasters and high stakes, and like we're sweating and shaking, and like you're gonna miss that 6-foot putt, like it. So I mean, we all put 50,000 putts into the game. Okay, so like it was a thing for real. But yeah, I mean, you're checking time zones. We're like, all right, I gotta get in with a guy in Germany. He can only connect at 10 a.m. tomorrow. It's like, Amir or I or his brother would walk up front. We're like, I gotta go play this match. Sorry, can we meet later? So yeah, it was wild. And it becomes its own thing, and it's an ecosystem, and leaderboards and competition in very small ways or very big ways. Is also a really big driver of like, I want to get back in there. I want to go check it out. So yeah, we take a bunch of notes from it, right? Because you can always learn from everything that everybody else is doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I wanted to bring it up. The golfing piece that Amir mentioned around like why people will say like business professionals historically have golfed, right? It's to get out of the office. It's to have more one-on-one meaningful conversations in a less stuffy environment where we're kind of relaxing. We're out in nature, but we're in person, and you lose a lot of that over Zoom. And you even in person, you lost a lot of that in a conference room. It's why we went out and got out of the office to do that. But to your point, if I want to do business with somebody in Germany, I have to hop on a plane, one of us does, in order to have those kinds of experiences, or I have to sacrifice the benefits of being in person and do it over Zoom, which is better than a phone call, but it's not much better, right? It's still that two-dimensional, like I'm used to being, this is just normal, like a normal conversation I expect to have. Whereas when you go into an immersive environment and you, especially doing the thing that you would do in person, if it's built really well, like Golf Plus sounds like it is, that is a great way to sit down, have those conversations, feel like you're next to them in the same environment, and you're doing something that like makes sense with the context of the conversation. I think there's a lot of applications, not just even outside of business, where that can come into play. And I'm really excited to see some companies come in and build some really cool stuff around that. Well, cool, guys. I appreciate your time. It's been great chatting with you. We'll definitely have to hop on some Golf Plus in the near future after I get my 50,000 putts in starting tonight. Tell these guys where they can find you.
Yeah, I mean, we're super excited about where Simulacra is headed. So you can check us out at simulacra.io or across the interwebs at simulacra_io. Doing a lot of fun stuff there. We're hosting meetups every second and fourth Wednesdays of the month. We've got a couple of special partnerships planned. We've got some new spaces rolling out, including with your friends from Flexi. So lots of fun stuff coming up there. And like anybody who's even wants to just meet up or connect with me to spend some time in there or learn some more about it, like you can just hit us up, shoot us a message on social is probably the best way to do that.
Awesome. Well, it's been a pleasure, guys. Amir, any last words?
No, thanks for having me. I really appreciate the time and platform to spread the word, and look forward to following you on your journey as well.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Well, thank you all for listening. It's been a pleasure, and we'll see you on the next one.